Welcome to our Satsang journey, the North American BAPS Yuvak and Yuva Podcast. Today's episode offers an honest and thoughtful reflection for anyone facing illness, loss, or a difficult family circumstance, reminding us that Satsang doesn't remove hardship, but helps us walk through it with strength and clarity. My name's Adi, and we're joined here today by Mautikbhai from Chicago, and we're going to be talking about his father. But before we get into the ALS diagnosis and your caregiving, can you tell us a little bit more about him?
Of course, and first of all, I'm glad to be on this podcast here today. So my father was born and raised in the small village of Vaso. And fun fact, the Haveli that we're sitting in right now, the architecture and the design, the wood carvings are actually based on the Haveli in Vaso in Gujarat. And it's a small village. He grew up with his parents and two other siblings. And as he grew up in Vaso and got older, the entire family decided to immigrate to America. And so he was only 16 years old at the time. And so those who've immigrated to the United States in high school know how difficult it is, especially not knowing the language. So he was 16 years old, he moved to America. And after 2 years of high school, because of financial constraints, my grandfather or his father decided it would be a good idea to enlist him in the army for a few years. And the reason being is that back then you would get an income as well as it would cover part of your degree. So it's a win-win situation. And so at that time, my father went into the US Army, and specifically it's a TDME group. And this group is basically just engineers that deal with everything, all the equipment, all the artillery, everything with the Army. And their role is to make sure that every single equipment is precise, is accurate, is doing its job. My dad, ever since he was little, from the stories I've heard, was always a perfectionist, kind of an engineer by heart and by trade. And so this kind of fit his role. But the difficult part in it was during his 6 months training in Oklahoma, and then he was stationed in Louisiana, he was only one of two Indians in the Army. And he was the only vegetarian, the only Hindu at that time. Now, in the 1980s, not a lot of Indian Americans or Hindu Americans would go into the Army in the first place. So I think for me, it's a sense of pride that, seeing his dog tag, his identification, it says Hindu on his dog tag. It's a sense of pride for me. But at the same time, while he was in the Army, in the beginning, they would give him, the normal food, omelets and things with meat in it. And, the first 2 days he would kind of deal with it, but then he was frustrated that, I'm a vegetarian. I grew up as a vegetarian. I'm a Hindu. Is there any way for me to get an exemption? And so he wrote to his father, and his father wrote to the commander, and he actually got an exemption. And my grandfather actually sent a small rice cooker for him as well. But for the few years that he was in the US Army, the only thing he ate was cereal and milk, fruits, bread, and then a little bit of khichdi, whatever he could make in his room. And seeing this flag, it inspires me that in the 80s, being the only Hindu, being the only vegetarian in your batch at that time, and still having this, khatko, this enthusiasm that, no, I'm a Hindu, I'm a vegetarian, I can't eat meat, and staying in your niyam dharma in that sense, it's not easy. And seeing the flag, and his service in the Army, kind of just reminds me of, how he was as an individual. It's a small anecdote, but it really shows his character and who he was as an individual.
I'm sure you must have spent, a lot of time with your father growing up, together with your mother as well. Can you share a little bit about, your fondest memories with him?
I have a lot of memories with him. One thing was that he was very intelligent. He knew everything from the world GDP to places on a map to what's going on, all the geopolitics in the world, to even the mundane things in life. How do you fix a toilet? How do you fix a sink? How do you vacuum properly? How do you make sure that, when you're mowing the lawn, there's a nice crease in the middle? He knew everything. He was so intelligent and he had so much wisdom. And alongside that, he was very precise. I remember that he would always say like, hey, why do you have an 89% and not a 90%? Like an A is an A. And even if you got an A, then he's like, well, it's an A minus. It's not an A or an A plus. He was always precise, whether it was mowing the lawn, whether it was vacuuming at home, whether it was something as simple as doing my homework. And anytime that he would see and he would correct me. Very perfect individual. But with that perfection and with that wisdom, he was very humble. We know Pramukh Sai Maharaj's motto of in the joy of others lies our own. And I saw that with my dad. He would go out of his way to help anyone. There are many stories of many members in our family who've emigrated from India to America. And my mom and dad and my grandparents would house them and basically teach them, this is how you drive a car, this is how you get an ID, this is how you get a loan, this is how you set up a bank account, all these different things. And my father took the time for each individual in teaching all of these basic things in life. He never flaunted that, I have all this wisdom, you have to listen to what I say. He might get mad that if you don't listen to what he says, then he would get mad. But he was so humble in everything he did. He was so genuine. And I think that's also the reason that everyone in our family, even myself, we're always attracted to him. That he was intelligent, he was precise, but he had this sense of humility with him as well.
Yeah, I think, the way that you speak about your father, it must have been, so much fun on the day-to-day, learning all these new things. But, I feel like life seems so normal every day for us. But obviously for you, that normal abruptly changed. So can you talk a little bit about when that normal no longer started to feel like that anymore?
I think it's, I like to say there's a trailer to a movie, right? Mm-hmm. There's always a trailer before you see a movie. In the same way, in 2019, while I was in college, my dad had his spine from C2 to C6 just collapsed, and he had to get immediate surgery. I came home, and then I found out that all of this was going on. I didn't even know. I was finishing up my finals. I came back, and then my mom told me that, hey, by the way, your dad is going in surgery. It's a major surgery. And the days after that, I had to learn to caregive for my father in the sense of visit him in rehab. When I was outpatient, I would have to take him. I would have to sometimes forego, certain commitments, whether it was at mandir or with my friends, to make sure that I can spend the time with him, making sure that he gets better. And then after that, everything was fine. Everything got better. Everything was stable. And then December of 2021, my father was showing signs of weakness. So he was walking a little bit slower. His hands were, it was a little bit harder to grip with a pen. So instead of gripping like this, he would start to grip with using other fingers or gripping it like this. And we would push him that, why don't you go see a doctor? Why don't you go see a neurologist? It was winter break, so I went back to college. It was my last semester in college. And for those 6 months, my mom took him to see the neurologist. And they did many different examinations during that time, just to rule out if anything was wrong with the spine, anything else is going on, whether it's his diabetes or thyroid or anything else. Rule everything out before they make a decision. Everything happened. And then after I graduated college, I went for Akshardham Site Seva for a month. And in that, my mom called me and told me that, you'll have to come back. I know you're starting work. You can also push off the start date and everything, but you have to come back. Now, at that time, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that something was happening. And so I came back home. And right before I started work, my mom took my dad to the neurologist, came back, and she basically said that the neurologist thinks that it is ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. And this was July of 2022. And at that time, I didn't know what it was, so I just went on Google, and Googled, what is ALS, what is this, what is that? Did a little Googling. And the neurologist said that, I'm 90% sure, but I want you to go see a specialist at the Northwestern ALS clinic in downtown Chicago, just to make sure. So the appointment wasn't until September, so we were in this weird holding pattern of it might be ALS, it might not be, but we still had this hope that, everything's going to be okay. We went in September of 2022. And Dr. P, who was the neurologist there, a wonderful doctor, he did an examination, went through his reports, and gave the diagnosis that you have ALS. This is a classic case of any individual who has ALS. And then I still remember, like, right after him, one after another, all these doctors and nurses and all these different people came. And we were like, what is going on? Like, with all of these doctors and with all these individuals. But I think that point in time, getting that diagnosis of ALS was that turning point in my life.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of our audience members might not be familiar with what ALS is. So could you dive a little deeper into what the disease is and, what you initially found out through your research, compiled with, what the doctors were telling you at the time?
So ALS is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It's a progressive neurological disorder which affects the motor neurons. So all of your voluntary muscles, right? Me just doing a thumbs up right now, right? I didn't have to think much about it. It was pretty easy for me to do. But what happens in ALS is that the signal in the neurons get weaker over time to these voluntary muscles. And over time, because they get weaker, your muscles also get weaker. So think of this as a progressive weakness over time. So for me, just doing this, someone with ALS might try to do a thumbs up, and might not be able to do it. Because even though the signal is going through in their head, they're physically unable to do it. Again, it's just weakness over time. And that day when we got the diagnosis of ALS, there are many different forms. For my father, it was a limb onset, meaning it started with his hands and legs, and then it'll work towards swallow, speech, and then ultimately your diaphragm, because your diaphragm is a muscle. And the doctor said that on average, an individual will get 2 to 5 years after their diagnosis with ALS. Anything beyond 2 years, you're basically grateful for at that point. And so that's kind of when everything got real, where you realize that it's a ticking time bomb, that you only have 2 years at best. Some individuals might be less than 2 years, some might be more than 5 years. You can never tell with a disease like this, and especially now, over 5,000 people every year are getting diagnosed with ALS. So the more and more people are getting diagnosed, the crazy thing is that there is no cure for this. You can take medications to delay the weakness and the progression, but there is no cure. There is no actual treatment for this. So you're kind of just living with this terminal illness. And I think that's when, once we started to understand after a diagnosis, what is this, how will it affect, seeing different people, even celebrities and all these individuals getting ALS, what they had to do, I think that's when everything started to get real for me.
So you mentioned that you were at Sai Seva, and I feel like for everyone that attended Sai Seva, it was like a turning point in their life. That, one phase finished, the next one started. For you, it's a massive turning point. So you were starting a new job, there's a new set of expectations, and then you kind of got hit with, hey, my father has ALS. So you obviously knew that I have to, step into a new role into my life, this role of a caregiver, along with a son, along with being someone at work. So what did stepping into that role of being a caregiver kind of look like for you?
I think there's two things with that. I think first is that it was naturally easy for me to step into that role because I've seen other individuals in my life being a caregiver for their loved ones. And I think the best example is my mother. I've seen my mom, be a caregiver for my grandparents, for my dad. And she did everything with a smile. She never showed anyone, all the challenges and all the obstacles. And so just seeing her being able to easily be a caregiver to help others, I kind of think it was like a no-brainer for me. That I can easily step into this role. If she can do it, I can also do it. I can lend a helping hand. But I think the second thing with that is kind of having the mahima. We talk about having mahima for seva. I think having this mahima for doing this type of seva, right, for my father, knowing that it's a ticking time bomb, knowing that I'll have to slowly and gradually do more for him. At Mandir, what do we learn ever since we're in Bharat Mandal? We learn Matru Devo Bhava, Pitru Devo Bhava. We learn the stories of Prahlad, Dhruv, Shravan. These are not just things that we learn just for the sake of learning it, right? We learn about prasangs of Yogiji Maharaj and how he tolerated. Pramukh Sai Maharaj, how he did seva. Mahan Sai Maharaj, how he does seva. It's not just something you learn and like that's it. Like at this point in time, you have a chance to live it, actually live by those values. I know we say Matru Devo Bhava, Pitru Devo Bhava, and there are days, don't get me wrong, where you might be mad at your parents, you might have arguments with them. It's sometimes hard, right? Having this generational gap, but at the end of the day, they're still your parents. They've sacrificed a lot for you. And giving them the respect and the dignity is the least that we can do. And so I think it's a mix of these two things, is seeing someone be in that caregiver role and also learning about the Mahima of Seva at Mandir through Bar Sabha, Kishore Sabha, and Yuvak Sabha.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a great point. I think it's really interesting for us to see, how our moms, take care of our dads, take care of our grandparents. Speaking from my experience, like I've lived in a household where both sets of my grandparents live with me. So I've always grown up, it's always been second nature to see my mom, take care of both sets of grandparents, take care of me and my brothers, attend to every need of, everyone in the family. So I completely agree with you that when you see something like that, it definitely makes it, even the slightest bit of easier for yourself. But now that we're talking about, caregiving for your father in this situation, I do think that it's a little bit different than, the care that you might give to your grandparents or a care that a mother might give to her kids. So what did this caregiving for your father specifically look like? Like, what did your day-to-day kind of look like with him?
I think from a day-to-day perspective, my dad is a true army man. So everything has to be on schedule. 6 a.m., you have to wake me up. At this time, you have to give me breakfast, lunch, dinner. You have to take me out for a walk. You have to do X, Y, and Z. He was a very punctual person. He liked that punctuality. And I think that helps for the caregiver, especially, that when you're on a schedule naturally, as a caregiver, I don't really have to think. And so I had to do everything from, waking him up to transferring him from the bed into the wheelchair onto a stair lift onto a power wheelchair. I know a lot of people at Mandir has seen him on that power chair. So transferring him, as it got worse, and if he had like incontinence and things like that, I would have to change him every day, every week, on the weekend, Saturday morning, Sunday morning, take him into the shower, give him a shower, give him a nice shave, do his haircut, take him around. And so from a day-to-day perspective, it seems like everything is very systematic and everything is normal. But in ALS, there's something called hits. Hits is where a few weeks go by, everything seems fine, everything's stagnant, and then something happens that drastically decreases that person's ability to move or do a certain function. And so over time, we had to get a lot of different, modifications for our house, whether it's a stair lift, whether it's getting that power chair, whether it's remodeling our bathroom, getting a ramp, getting a van to allow for the power chair to go into the van, whether it's, all of these small things that you wouldn't think about needing. It adds up over time. And so caregiving was not just the day-to-day, but it was also these hits. When we decided to take my dad to India in 2023, and right after that, July 4th, 2023, he fell, couldn't walk again. So we had to get all of these modifications one after another, ultimately to where he was dependent on something called a BiPAP machine, an Astral, which acts as basically an external ventilator or your external diaphragm to allow you to breathe normally. And so there's a lot of things that you had to think about when giving care, when I had to give care to my father. But I think one thing in this is that through and through, you see Bhagwan Krupa. My dad went to the army for a few years. Then he was diagnosed with ALS. We went to the Northwestern Clinic. After a few months, they're like, hey, he's a veteran. Why don't you go see someone at the VA hospital? So we went to the Veterans Affairs Hospital here in Hines. And they said, yeah, a lot of veterans, for some reason, get ALS. It's a higher rate in veterans. And so he's 100% service connected, meaning he's 100% benefited at the VA hospital.
Wow.
So everything over time was just Bhagwani Krupa. Like everything just lined up so perfectly where, okay, you got this diagnosis early on, so you have some time, you're getting this medication now. And early on with insurance, of course, insurance is a headache sometimes. There was one company that when we were getting the medication, because it was through an IV, through a port that he had, inserted, they actually had a separate fund to cover the expenses for it.
Wow.
And so we didn't have to pay the full amount. We had a reduced amount because they were generous enough for that. We got connected with the VA, even on the last visit, every single step of the way, you look at other stories and then I look at my story and I'm like, Bhagwani Krupa che, that everything, God's grace, that everything went on time, it happened on time, and I didn't really have to worry. My mom didn't have to worry a lot about it from a financial aspect at least, which is also one thing, less for a caregiver to worry about.
100%. And I feel like, at a time like this, you were talking about the VA, but I feel like in times where someone is going through an illness, the entire village comes together. Even parts of the village that you least expect, they kind of come all at once. And we're very fortunate to have this Satsang community, to obviously have everyone here at the blink of an eye to come and support us anytime something like this happens. I feel like any time that we talk about an illness, there's just so much going on behind the scenes, and no one that's on the outside is really able to understand it. And all this conversation kind of got me thinking. Back in 2019, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, and our entire family kind of just blew up in that moment, and we didn't really even know what to think. But obviously for us, even like you mentioned, life changed in the blink of a second, and it was extremely difficult. But now that I think back to that moment, initially the hardest thing for me was trying to find a balance with everything going on. I was in school. I just changed my major, and I was really lucky and Bapa's Krupa that I was so close to home going to school in the city. But nonetheless, there was still so much going on. I felt like with Mandir, school, obviously balancing things on the home front. But I want to hear a little bit from you. What was balance like in that time frame when you got hit with the news?
Truth be told, I wasn't able to balance. I was terrible at prioritizing, full honesty. It's not like, oh, wow, you're able to do everything. No, I was terrible at it. I think for me, it was the fact that because I had work, I had seva, I still had to come to Sabha, I had family obligations, taking care of my dad, spending time with friends, all these different things. I never took time for myself, and I never really prioritized. I kind of just did everything on the fly. When you put a car into autopilot, it just kind of goes. I think those 3 years with my dad, it was just on autopilot. I just kept on doing everything. But the thing that helped me was the fellowship, the community at Mandir. A lot of the Swamis, the Caregivers, other Yuvaks, they would force me to balance. They would say that it's okay if you don't come to Mandir for this event. Stay at home and spend time with your family. I usually had a rule that if I spend one day at Mandir, the other day I'll try to stay at home on the weekend. And so most people knew that. So they're like, it's okay. You don't have to come in the evening. You don't have to do this. You don't have to help out with Yuva Seva. Everyone understood that what was my capacity, what was my limit, and how much I could actually contribute. And I think that helped a lot. Having other people repeatedly tell you, hey, you're not taking time for yourself. I need you to take just 5 minutes this week, go to a coffee shop, go do something else, and take time for yourself. That really helped me a lot, especially in those moments when I wasn't able to do it for myself.
100%. I feel like it's not talked about enough how fortunate we are to have people constantly looking out for us. It's one thing for people to, ask about how your dad was doing, for me, how my mom is doing, but people go beyond that. They ask, how are you doing? They remind us to take the time for ourselves. And that's so unique, I feel like, in Satsang. And when we talk about illness, these hardships, I feel like so blessed that we have, this satsang community to rely on. And also Bapa has given us such a strong message about Samp. So kind of segueing into this topic, like what did Samp look like at home? Because I know when things change, the first thing that it impacts maybe is our family dynamic, how we go about things in a day-to-day as a family. So what did that look like, during this entire process of you caregiving for your father?
Pramukh Swami Maharaj gave a very nice motto for Samp, or an acronym, that Sahan karu, tolerate, anukur thau, you have to adjust, man gam vumuku, that you have to sometimes, forget whatever you want to do, what your desires are, and parasparevu, to live with unity, to live with harmony. And so for me, I think going into helping my dad, my mom told me something very important, and she said, if you're going to do this seva, you're going to do it with a smile. That if you're going to help your dad, take care of him, you can't be frustrated, you can't be angry with him, you have to do it with a smile, do it with positivity, enjoy doing it, enjoy spending those moments with him. And so I think that was a big thing in keeping that Samp is, we think of Sahan karu, to tolerate, as like a negative thing, or only when someone else does something to us, then we kind of just shrug it off, we kind of go with the flow. But my mom showed me that, like Yogi Baba, how he used to always have a smile on his face, tolerate with a smile. My mom taught me the same thing, that you tolerate with a smile. You do things and you enjoy doing it. Don't just tolerate because you have to do it. And you will be frustrated. You'll be frustrated with your parents, with your family, all the time. You're going to get into arguments all the time. But just having that in the back of your head that, I can be frustrated in my room, I can be frustrated away from them, but in front of them, you're going to do it with a smile. Anukur thau. When we brought my dad downstairs, my mom and I had a deal that she would sleep on the weekdays so that I can focus on work, and since I would take care of my dad during the day. And on the weekends, I would sleep downstairs with my dad. So it gives her that respite care, that rest. And so just aligning your schedules and adjusting accordingly is important. Sometimes, there were times where I wanted to come to Mandir. I wanted to go on a trip. I wanted to do X, Y, and Z. And even though I wanted to do it, at that point in time, you kind of have to let things go. That, okay, maybe I'll attend Shibir, but I can't go to this event or that event. My mom and I, I was thankful that I had grandparents at home as well, especially my ba. So between my ba, my mom, and I, we did such a good job at tag teaming to take care of my dad. And at the same time, my dada, my dad's dad, had dementia. And so we also had to take care of him. And so somehow we did a good job at tag team of this, like, we did just like, we knew that, okay, this is important to you, you go, but then, I'll take over another weekend or another day. And it was so flawless. It's one of those things that, like, you don't have to think about keeping something, you kind of just do it. So I think that was like one of the things that really helped us during this time. I know you helped your family, took care of your mom. Do you have any examples from your life of how you kept Samp during that difficult time?
Yeah, I think, when you were talking about it, it actually reminded me that, like, everyone kind of tags in. So obviously, similar to you, I wouldn't be home, like, during the weekdays. So when my mom was going through chemotherapy, obviously the days to follow were, like, brutal. So I wouldn't be home, so I, would not have any idea of what's going on at home until, like, I came home in the evening, or sometimes even when I came back on the weekends. But it was so flawless. When my mom initially got the diagnosis, we decided as a family that, hey, let's write to Bapa. And the biggest things that Bapa told us in his Ashirwad when he wrote back was to focus on Niyam Dharma as a family. So I think that was like the guiding light for us in terms of keeping Samp all the time. And whenever, my ba wasn't available, like, my nani stepped in. When my dada wasn't available, my dad was there. And, like, when no one was there, my brothers were there. So it was just so flawless. And we felt like, Bapa had blessed us, with this family and this Samp amongst our family, that we were able to kind of keep things going during this entire time. Now, when we talk about, like, Samp and all these different things going on, it's one thing to talk about it I feel like when there's just an illness and there's kind of a cure going on. But in your situation, you were told that, hey, your dad has anywhere from 2 to 5 years, and that I feel like is something so difficult to come to terms with, because people say that, life and death is such a natural part of life, but until you're faced with it, I feel like those words don't exactly come to life. So when when you were thinking about these things like, hey, we don't know how much time that we have with him, like, how did you feel, and like, what did satsang do for you in that time?
I mean, I have to give all the props to Bhagwan and the Satpurush for all of this. I mean, truly, satsang is such a big factor of our lives. It's such a foundational value. And when you think about it, when we go to Bal Mandal, Kishore Mandal, Yuvak Mandal, growing up at Mandir, what do you learn? I'm the Atma. I'm not this body. What's our goal in life? Aksharamaham Purushottam Dasosmi. That's our sadhana and that's our siddhi. What's moksha? You keep hearing this ever since you're little. And so it kind of conditions you that you already know that you're the Atma, even though you don't behave like that. Right? You don't, fully understand it. But it's in your head that, okay, I'm the Atma. We come with nothing. We leave with nothing. Like all of these things that you hear ever since you're a kid, that's stuff that really sticks with you in these moments. And I think the biggest thing for me, especially during this difficult time, was having something called a Satsang Toolkit. All these concepts, prasangs, katha, varta that we listen to, kirtans that we listen to, whether it's in sabha, whether it's outside of mandir, sometimes it just gets lost in the noise. That we have so much content, we listen to so much, but we forget which ones are the most meaningful to us, which ones are the most inspiring. And so I created a Satsang Toolkit, initially on Telegram, and then I moved it to Google Drive, where it has all of my favorite kirtans, kathas, pictures of Swami Shri, any funny prasangs, any prasangs that are motivational, any prasangs of other Hari Bhakta who have been through similar situations, whether it's in Chicago or around the world. I just kept everything in one place. And whenever I felt down, disturbed, frustrated, stressed, I would go back to it. And I would look at it, I would look at whatever inspired me in that moment and reflected on why did that piece of satsang impact me the most. There's two things from that toolkit that I really love that even till this day I listen to almost every day. First one is a kirtan, Hari Gun Gata. It's a chausar pad, so it's a pad with 4 stanzas and there's 4 of those pads put together, so that's known as a chausar. And in it, the audio track actually came out just 2 weeks before my dada went to Dham back in 2024, October of 2024. And I love listening to it and I love looking at the lyrics. And my favorite lyric in all of those buds is that Jo Vasudeva Devaki Bandharaya Bahukare Bandhan Dur Thaya Hari Putre Toye Mahadukh Saya Hari Putre Toye Mahadukh Saya Hari Jan Thaine Han Varad Sukh Dukh Man Manav Dhariye. That Krishna Bhagwan's parents, right? Your own son is Bhagwan, is Krishna Bhagwan, and you still have to go through all of this dukh, all of this misery, still being in jail and everything, despite knowing that your own son is Bhagwan and can, get rid of all of that dukh. Like, you put yourself in that situation and you think that they had to go through all that dukh. You look at our entire Sanatan Dharma, you look at Mirabai, Surdas, Narsi Mehta, you look at our Bhakta Raj and Bhakta Bhais in the Swaminarayan Sampradaya, Dada Khachar, Laduba, Jiuba, Kushal Kaurba, you look at all of them and you realize that if you are Bhagwan na Bhakt, you're not immune to dukh, you're not immune to challenges. If anything, once you put on a kanti, you're going to get more challenges. Honest to God.
Yeah.
But you have that dharta that, what? God is all doer, Bhagwan sarva karta che. And even if I don't understand it in this moment, even if I don't have 100% faith in this moment, but I still know that it's true. I still have this firm faith that sachu che. there's a very nice katha that I listen to, that I still listen to. Mahansai Maharaj, and I don't know how I found this. There's a Telegram channel called Kathamrut, and every day they just post 5-minute kathas, because we have goldfish brains, we can't listen to much. And so it's just 5-minute kathas. And somehow I found this katha and I listened. And Mahansai Maharaj said that when someone has a terminal illness, like stage 4 cancer, what do people in the world think? Lokik drashtiye, everyone thinks, oh, I got this due to my karmas. I got this because this is my prarabdha. I got this because it was destined for me. I have to live with it. You sulk in that misery. But satsangi thaine, Bhagwana bhakta thaine, harijan thaine, how do you have to think? That Bhagwan has blessed me with this dukh, with this rog. Why? Because it's a chance for me to get rid of all my swabhavs, to become nirvasnik, and become worthy of going to Akshardham in this very birth. There's a very nice prasang of Adibhai, Soni, in the UK. And he uses these exact same words that before he came into satsang, before he got a autoimmune disorder, literally he was like, I used to go out, I used to smoke and drink and have all these addictions. Then I came into satsang, and then right after, Bhagavan gave me this dukh, this disease. And so instead of looking at it from a bad perspective, you can think that, man, I have 5 years to just do satsang, right? Bhagavani bhakti, just to enjoy sant samagam, all of that. Swami Shri's katha was so impactful for me in that moment, thinking and putting into perspective that this challenge is not going to go away. This obstacle is not going to go away. But it shifts your perspective in how you look at the challenge, how you look at what you're going through, right? I'm sure you probably have some things in your satsang toolkit that you thought of as well.
Yeah, and I love the term for it, the satsang toolkit. Obviously, I didn't have the term for it, but definitely I did have, a few things that I would constantly look back at in those bad days. Because I know when we talk about it in situations like these, you have good days, you have bad days. Just like people in the illness have good days and bad days, I feel like the individuals that are giving care, or even the individuals that are just thinking about, what must be going on with the person with the illness, they have those good days and bad days. And I think it's so important for everyone to have this satsang toolkit, because you never know when you're going to be faced with a situation like this. For me, it came in the form of a lot of katha that I listened to, and just a lot of the smrutis that I have with Mahansai Maharaj that kind of got me through a lot of the tough days, you could say. And thinking about it now, like the best thing, like for me then, was this one katha that I remember in which Swami was talking about kartapanu. And it goes hand in hand with this. And the biggest thing he started off with is that we're going to face dukh in our life. Ke Bhagwan pariksha kar sej. But Bhagwan does pariksha of his bhaktas. And that's, I feel like, one thing that needs to be noted, that you've chosen to be a bhakta of Shriji Maharaj. And that's why he's going to test you. Like, you're going to get dukh in your life. But any time that something bad happens in our life, I feel like it's so easy for us to blame Maharaj, be like, hey, why did you do this to me? And on the flip side, when something good happens, it's like, oh, I did it, But in those dark moments, those times where we have this dukh, our mind goes into like 50, 60 different places, all these negative thoughts. But Swami summarizes it into 3 buckets, 3 practical buckets, 3 ways of thinking that we can adopt to help us get out of any of these, situations. And when I talk about getting out of the situations, it's not getting rid of the dukh, but shifting our mindset, shifting our perspective, so we're able to take it in a different way, shift our mindset. And the first bucket, the first thing he talks about is whenever we're faced with difficulty, any type of dukh in our life, Maharaj is giving us that dukh as a test. Ke pariksha kare chhe. And I know I mentioned it earlier, but he's testing you. Then the second bucket is swabhav tarva. So there must be a swabhav in you that you need to control. And through this dukh, through this experience, you're going to be able to, jump over that hurdle, get past it. And the last thing, and I feel like for me, now that I think about it, in so many situations, this third bucket immediately gets you past any dukh that you might have, because it's like a sigh of relief. And it's this one phrase, ke shurinu dukh kante matar se, meaning that it could have been much worse, right? It could have been so bad, but Maharaj is getting it done in the prick, of a little thorn. And I like to use this example whenever I talk to Badaks and Kishors about, Kartapanu, that let's say, for example, you're playing basketball and you break your arm. Now, you must be thinking, like, why did I have to break my arm? And you're having all these negative thoughts that I'm never going to be able to play basketball again. I might not even be able to drive again. Like, all these different things. But now let's put this into these 3 different buckets. Okay, first, that Maharaj gave me this look that I broke my hand. Swabhav Darwa. So I might be very egotistical on the court, or I might be very angry, get krodh bo ase, when I'm playing basketball. And for that reason, I might have broken my arm to kind of get that into check, to realign. Now the other thing, pariksha karwa. Maharaj maybe wants to see that you play basketball at Mandir every week. If you break your arm and you're no longer able to play basketball, are you going to stop coming to Mandir? What's that kind of like? And that's, I guess, the pariksha. And the last thing, and I feel like this could have taken the burden away from the jump, that maybe I was meant, to get hurt in a way where half my body could have been paralyzed in a way that I landed. But Maharaj got it done in just a small fracture in my arm. So now when you think about it, it completely shifts. And I feel like having kathas like these moments in our Satsang Toolkit really change and shift our perspective anytime something like this is happening. And, talking about it, I feel like when we're doing the caregiving, and especially the initial stages where, we might have heard about the prognosis, we're just going about it kind of mechanically. We kind of get into a rhythm. And especially for people that are caregiving for an illness like cancer, where treatment is being done, I feel like it gets so mechanical. But I feel like in your situation, you were told that your father had anywhere between 2 to 5 years. And I understand that your father is no longer with us. If you wish to share, could you tell us a little bit about his final moments?
6:30 in the morning, the hospice nurse came, took a look at my dad, and she said that he's transitioning. He's beginning to transition. So we're like, transition to what? Like, what's going on? Transitioning, to death. Like, he's passing right now. You would think that usually, we think of death as a switch. Like, you're here and then you're not here. Or maybe like one of those like dimmer switches at home that like you're here and then after a few minutes you're not here. Transitioning was a new term for us, where your organs slowly shut down. You're still present. And the hospice nurses, they tell you that their soul, their atma is still present. They can still hear you, but they can't communicate with you because their organs are slowly shutting down one after another. And so that was on Sunday morning, I believe August 31st, and he was slowly transitioning now. She said that, I don't know if it'll be a few hours, if it's a few days, we don't know. Just have to see what happens. So that day we called some family to just visit and, meet him and everything. And, he was fine that day. Still had a pulse and everything that day. So he was still present. And then that night I felt, that from my reassurance, I need to talk to Santos and I need to see if I can get Ashirwad or something. So I texted Puja Vatsal Murthy Swami that, here's the situation. And he asked that, do you want to get Bapa's Ashirwad? And I said, I need that. Sometimes in those moments, it's a little bit selfish, but it's less about that person who's leaving and more for yourself, that you need that reassurance that everything's going to be okay, everything will be fine. That was that night. Went through the night. My mom was with my dad, and that entire day we played different bhajans, kirtans. She was reading from the Bhagavad Gita to my dad and everything. I was way too tired, so I went to sleep. And then woke up in the morning. Everything seemed fine. Everything seemed normal. And at 9 a.m., I remember my dad was here. I was sitting here as my ba, and then my mom. And then I checked my phone. I see Telegram notification. And Swami sent me Mahan Swami Maharaj's blessings, Ashirwad, that he got. And as soon as I got it, I played it for everyone. And in it, Bapa said that તમારા પિતા દુઃખ મુક્ત થઈને ધામમાં બેસી જાય એ જ પ્રાર્થના કરી છે. That I pray that your father is now free from all misery and will now sit in Akshardham. For me in that moment, that was the biggest thing for me, just having that one sentence from Bapa. Like, I didn't need anything else. Then after that, my mood changed. I was like, you know what? Anything's going to happen, that's fine. But I have this now. And everything's going to be fine. Everything will be okay. Because in that, Bapa said that, first of all, anyone could say those same words. Anyone could say that, oh, your father, is going to Akshardhan, or, everything's going to be okay. Anyone can say that. But who's saying it? The Satpurush. Bapa is saying it. First of all, you have that mahima of who's saying it. It's not just any ordinary guru, it's the Satpurush, Mansai Maharaj, that's saying it. And he's saying that first, Tamara Pita, Dukh Mukh Thaine. And I captured those three words, Dukh Mukh Thaine. Because my father faced so much physical, mental, emotional trauma throughout his life. As a son, like, the only thing that you wish for is, like, your father, to be better and to be well and everything. And so for Bapa to say, Dukh Mukh Thaine, I just captured onto those words. And then Dhamma Besi Jai. And I was like, whatever's going to happen will happen.
I feel like when something like this happens, and it's so difficult to, speak about it outside of the situation, but, really trying to step into your shoes, I mean, I feel like it's easy maybe initially because you're right in the motions. You know what needs to be done.
Yeah.
Like, it's happened. Now, hey, this is what comes next. This is what I need to do. But I feel like as time goes, then you maybe start to grieve. And I feel like as Yuvaks and Yutis, we haven't really been taught how to grieve. I lost my Nana, who was like a second father to me. And during that time period, he was actually visiting my Masi in Seattle. He lived with us, but he'd just been visiting. And suddenly he had a heart attack. So out of nowhere, right, he passed. And I remember being at work, getting just a call that, hey, he's had a heart attack. Don't be alarmed right now. Like my mom said, finish what you got to do at work and then come home. So I was driving home, and then I got like calls from a few people, but like in my head, I was like, I can't answer, like right now. I get home and I meet my brother in the garage, and that's where he tells me, what's happened. And in that moment, you get hit with this wave of, being upset. But as soon as I walked in to my house, this whole feeling of I need to be strong. What needs to happen? Like, I need to book my family's flights. They need to get to Seattle. I'll come with my brothers whenever, but my mom and my dad need to get there as soon as possible. So you get into these motions. You start doing whatever needs to be done right away. And you don't get time to really process, to grieve. And like I mentioned earlier, it's not something that's, taught to us. But I do feel like everyone that's in this situation has that thought in their head, like, I need to be strong. I remember being on the 4.5-hour flight from Chicago to Seattle, just thinking the entire time, like, I need to be strong. Like, what do I need to do? And that took me away from the situation. So, me telling this to you, when you hear words such as, you need to be strong, or you just simply think about, this period of grieving, what did it look like for you? Because your situation was so unique.
I actually had the opposite, where people were telling me you don't need to be strong.
Oh, okay.
But in my head, I knew that I needed to, just for my mom, for my ba, and for others in the family. Right?
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing for me was just having Bapa's Ashirwad. Like, you get that? And I don't know, I feel like the luckiest person in the world at that moment. Grief is such a unique thing because it's now been 6 months since my father's passed. coming up in just 2 days. And someone said something very nicely that like grief is like a glitter bomb, that like no matter how much you try to pick everything up and vacuum everything up, there's still bits and pieces around. And everyone has grief. It's a natural human emotion to feel. I had physical grief, days where I didn't want to get up from bed, days where I slept a lot, I didn't eat a lot, I ate too much. You have this emotional grief. I'm just back to work, I'm working, typing, and then all of a sudden I just stop. And a wave of all of these memories just come back at me. You have this mental grief. Your body goes into fight and flight mode. And so you have brain fog, you forget things. All of these different things happen. But after my father passed, the one thing that I did was I listened to Puja Vivek Sagar Swami's Katha, and his Katha on the Bhakta Chintamani that he did after Pramukh Swami Maharaj went to Dham in 2016. And in every single Katha, he said something very nice. He said, it takes longer for the heart to heal than the head. It takes longer for the heart to heal than the head. So having this grief isn't bad, because it's natural that when you love someone, when you respect someone, right, you're going to have those emotions and it's not going to go away. Some people say that it goes away after 1 year, 5 years. That's not true. You're going to have to live with this grief for the rest of your life, and it changes who you are as a person, your identity. But Satsang has gifted us this ability to get over our heads first, and now it's just time to grieve in the heart. There's a very nice prasang from the Vachanamrit. I think it was Raghunath Das, where after Ramanand Swami went to Dham, he was had a false positivity about himself. Everything's okay, everything's cool. And Maharaj was like, no, it's okay to grieve. And he didn't take the time for himself to grieve, and eventually he fell out of satsang, I believe. And so Maharaj is telling us it's okay to grieve for your loved ones. Having that empathy is not bad, it's important. But at the same time, it's important to have the samjan. Right? Like Vivek Sagar Swami said, the grief of the heart is going to stay. But why was it easy for me to get up at my father's funeral and talk about him, talk about the prapti that we've attained? Is because you get that over that mental hurdle in the first place. Again, everything you learn from Bard, Kishore, Yuvak Sabha, that you come with nothing, you leave with nothing, you're the Atma, you're not this body. You had so many mothers and fathers in past janams, and now in this janam, right, this is just another mother and father. It's something special. And you lean in not just on these prasangs and this samjan, but you lean in on the samjan of other folks. Look at our satsang. You have parents, and there are many prasangs of this, not just one or two. You have parents who, when their son or daughter goes to Dham, whether it's an accident or an illness or something, what's the first thing that they do? They give pandas and chocolates to everyone at mandir. There are many prasangs of them telling everyone, wear sherwani, because I'm sending my son and daughter off to Bhagwan to go to Akshardham. You see this with, mothers and fathers, someone grieving their loved ones. You don't see this anywhere else. This samjan, I'm grieving. It's hard, it's difficult. I have to learn to live with it. But you know what? Bhagwan and Satpurush che. They say they're going to Akshardham, they're going to go Akshardham. Now I don't have to worry about them. Right? Their moksha is pakku. You see this in so many other prasangs, so then you feel that, why not me? You feel that, man, I'm the luckiest person in this world. The Bhagwan and the Guru that I've met are true, they're honest, they have integrity. And so there's nothing more that I can complain about, there's nothing more that I can do, It's not this false sense of positivity, like false positivity, it's this samjan that, man, we really have something special here.
We really do. And I feel like talking about it, one of the things is anytime we talk about illness or caregiving, or even to the extent of loss, it's our community here that Bapa's gifted us that comes through for us whenever we need. I know you mentioned that we're so fortunate because satsang helps, the mind grieve, and then it leaves room for the heart, to grieve through time. Now, how did, the Yuvak community, the presence of individuals from Mandir help your mind grieve in moments, and even, after that, helped your heart grieve?
I mean, my heart grieves still till this day, and is probably going to grieve till the end. But when the news, the mandir mailing list went out that my father went to Dham, that day, that night, it hasn't even been 6 hours, and I get 200 messages from people all over the country telling me, Prarthna kariye chhe, we're praying for you, let us know if you need anything. I mean, where do you find such a community where within a day you get all of these messages, people genuinely reaching out to you, and these weren't one or two sentences that my condolences. Some people wrote paragraphs to console me. Many people called me. Many of the swamis, they called me, giving me guidance, encouraging me. It's such a tight-knit community that you don't find anywhere else. There's 13 days of mourning after someone passes, known as Termo. So during those 13 days, every day someone from Mandir would come to my house and just sit down, and I would go through this exact conversation of how everything happened, what happened, X, Y, and Z, have them listen to Bapa's Ashirvad. And they would sit there for 1-2 hours and just listen to my story. They wouldn't, they wouldn't say anything. They just were here. Just tell us what you need. During the funeral, so many Yuvaks showed up just to help out at the funeral, just to be there for me. It means a lot that the Mandir community can come together for something like this. Last minute to arrange everything together, and everything wasn't perfect. There are many mistakes and everything, but the fact that everyone from Mandir, was there to support me during that time and to honor my dad was a big deal to me. And even after that, I still get messages till this day of, how are you? Is everything okay? I haven't talked to you in a few weeks. Just want to check in on you. Do you need anything? It's this Samp Surat Bhav Ekta that we see at Mandir that I don't think I would have anywhere else. It's this unique community that we have that's really made this entire experience special.
I have to agree. I feel like when we talk about this, though, there's one side of it where it's how other people have shown some to us. But I think, taking some time out like we did today to reflect on all of our experience, we realize that it's also an opportunity for us to pay it forward.
Yep.
I do think that, listening to your experience, sharing mine, we talked a lot about, what it's like to give care to someone. We talked about what it's like to experience loss, to get help from individuals during loss. But I feel like whenever maybe we're given the opportunity, we see it in front of us that, hey, this individual in our satsang community needs the help, that he's caring for his father, his mother, his grandparents, whatever the case may be. It's an opportunity for us to reach out and ask how we can help, or maybe even do anything that we can to help him in that situation. So I think talking about, our shared experiences, our individual experiences, gives us motivation and gives us, a path forward to what we can do. And I feel like we can go back and forth about, individuals that have been there for us. Yeah. But I feel like it gives us an opportunity, gives us that perspective that how can I be that individual, for someone else? And
I think the biggest thing in that is starting by being vulnerable and just sharing your story. There are so many people at the Mandir that during these 3 years of my dad's ALS journey, they would have conversations with me, open up to me about how their dad passed, things that they had to do for caregiving, all of these different things. And those conversations had made a big difference in my life. Just talking to different doctors and whatnot at the Mandir makes a big difference. And so I think as Yuvaks and Yuvatis, being able to open ourselves up, be vulnerable, sharing our honest life experiences, sharing our stories with other Yuvaks and Yuvatis, and leaning on them for help as well, I think is that first step. And once we're able to have that vulnerability, share our stories, then maybe we see someone else who has a similar story that we can help them out. Maybe we see someone who might have a unique story, but we have an idea, okay, I can do this thing to help them out as well. So I think it's starting there is being vulnerable, sharing your story, and at the same time, being able to pay it forward as well.
100%. And when we talk about all these different things, if you're talking directly to the Yuvak and Yuvati audience, if you had to leave them with a few final words on, what they can do if they're ever in a situation of, having to care for someone, discovering that they might have an illness, or even, to the extent of experiencing loss in their lives. What advice or few pieces of advice would you give them?
I think first is build your Satsang toolkit from now. You can't build that toolkit after everything begins to happen. Build it from now. Every Kirtan, Katha, Prasang that you really like, that inspires you, put it into one place and keep referring back to it. The second thing I would say is lean in on the community. Share your experiences. Share your stories, of what's going on in your life with trusted caregivers, with other Yuvaks and Yuvatis. And I think that vulnerability will really, lend itself to not only helping you in that moment, but it'll bridge lifelong experiences. And the third thing, like we talked about, is paying it forward. That it's important that when we see someone in a situation, from the outside, everything looks fine, everything looks dandy, but we know that if they're in this situation, we should be the first ones to ask, are you okay? Let's talk about it. And paying that kindness forward, just like how our gurus did with everyone.
Absolutely. And Mautikbhai, thank you so much again for having the courage to talk about your experiences and sharing this with all the Yuvaks and Yuvatis of North America and everyone around the world, really. I think one of the biggest things that we can take away in talking about these things is that we're going to face hardship. Shriji Maharaj is going to give us hardship in our life. And we're just so fortunate to have satsang to, not just kick away this hardship and to just get rid of it and make sure it never comes again, but to have the toolkit to be able to navigate our lives with clarity and strength.